Typography, or the study of type, is an important part of curation. For example, when you are doing museum labels as a curator, when you are thinking about the text, when you think about the effect that you want labels to have on the viewers, that it's important to have an understanding of the fundamentals of typography. When you are doing an exhibition catalog, or planning a catalog, assisting in the plan, or directing the plan as a curator, an awareness of the impact of type on the viewer, and also making that discrimination between something that is going to be read on the web versus something that's going to be read in print. And the catalog you're designing is going to be very web dependent. In other words, it's not going to have a lot of print. One of the things that we still see so far, and as far as usage of the web, is that people don't go to the web to read long documents. When people want to read long documents, they're either reading them on their Kindles, or their e-readers, or they print them out, or they're buying the print copies. When people are using the web, they're expecting a multimedia experience. And that's why if you ever go into designing curriculum on the web, so for example, you're a museum educator, and you are looking at designing curriculum that will be used by schools and the like that's accessible through the web. You want to make sure that you give people a lot of stuff to look at, because the web is point and click. And so you have to adjust your behavior to a very short attention span. And that's what the web encourages. It's that ability to access an amazing amount of information from an amazing number of sources in a short period of time. Right? So the interface itself is designed to keep us doing something. So you have to think that if someone's looking at a web page and they look at it for more than 1 minute, and break out the pizza and Cokes, because we have a really short attention span on the web as compared to something in print. And so we have to keep this in mind as part of curation for a virtual show online, for example. So even when we're looking at typography, that we want to make sure that what's viewable on the web is going to look different when we print it out. And we want to even think about two different kinds of typefaces or fonts that we use, something on the web versus something that's going to be printed out. So we need to be aware of typography, the power of the study of type and letters in this overall picture. So what we're going to do, not so much distinguish among calligraphy or lettering, but more so typography. All right, calligraphy, if you've ever, there are various art schools, by the way, that teach calligraphy, which is the ways to use type very creatively. All right, and you're actually doing it longhand. All right, you can do it on a computer now, but you're actually learning. Very often, when you do calligraphy, you're using a bamboo stylus. All right, that calligraphy is a very old science, and a lot of it goes back to, for example, China, as well as early Islam. So calligraphy, lettering, but more so typography in here. So we want to get the types of definitions that we distinguish between, or the nomenclature, the terminologies that are used. A little bit about type measurements, type specifications, and classifications. But a lot of that actually is, I think, learned by point and click. Particularly in the virtual age, you learn that by trying different things out. Different type marks of the letters. I more or less in that section I'm going to distinguish between serif and sans serif. And I mentioned that earlier in the semester. Some real simple principles in designing the type and then understanding the visual factors that are involved in typographic design. Now, one of the things about the work that you've been doing out of the InDesign digital classroom is that you'll notice that your documents have been combinations of images and type. And that in different assignments, you've gotten different fonts or different typefaces, as well as different ways that those fonts appear to you. And they are all done with the intent to have a visual impact. And when we're looking at something that's more so designed for the web, a lot of the stuff that works in print no longer applies when we put it in an online format. So we need to understand the visual factors involved in designing something for printout as compared to being deployed for the web. With that understanding that people aren't going to the web to read long documents. So you need a lot of eye candy, and even your typefaces or your fonts have to be eye candy. They have to be attractive and have to work well in the overall design of the document. I'm not going to, at a different time, I'll talk about the types of spacing because that comes in some of your assignments too, as well as the form and the secondary as well as graphical impact. You'll see that to some degree in the assignments you're doing. How we relate type to visual. This particular assignment that you're using right now is part of that interrelationship where you've got blocks of text next to images and you are rounding, for example, the corner on the image, or you're doing wrap around the text with the image. These are parts of that relationship. So how do we use type create as creatively and expressively as we do our images? So typography is that design of letter forms and the arrangement of them in a two-dimensional space for print or in space and time with digital media. What's interesting in the history of typography, because before then it would have been your longhand, your calligraphy, as the earlier way that's, for example, a Bible that would have been produced in the year 900 would have been done longhand. It would have been completely written by hand. And then if you've ever heard of manuscript illumination, those would have been the images that would accompany the manuscript that give deeper levels of meaning to them. So books were quite precious. They still are. But it's amazing how over time our awareness of print and paper, and for that matter, color, because in the year 900, color was an important factor, not just in art, but in religion. Particularly if you're in Europe, the same place where the first, when the Gutenberg press was invented, what is the first book that was printed? The Bible. Who fought against the printing of that book? Yeah, it would have been in Rome. The Vatican fought the printing of the Bible. Because what that press did is it democratized the word. That it could produce enough of those books that more people would have access to God. Well, to that point, you went to your vicar or your priest, who then talked to a bishop, who then talked to a cardinal, all up the line until you got to the Pope. It was a chain of command, much like the Roman army. And then eventually the Pope is your direct phone to God. All of a sudden, you own the book, and you can read the book because the church also fought literacy. You could actually read the book. You didn't need to go and read. Type is important in world history. So it's actually pretty astounding when you think of what you can do now, just sitting in front of a computer. Because another thing that democratized information more so than television or radio. Because radio, you still had to get an FCC, for example, license to be able to access certain bandwidth. You still had to go through channels. For television, that's also very expensive to be able to broadcast. But the internet allowed people to do it. early internet was very type dependent because the bandwidth nor the ability in memory of a computer to process large photographs, you could transmit a lot of text. Made it so that, and as a curator today, if you were to upload your catalog to your website, it's viewable in China within half a second. That means 3/5 of the world's population could see that book if they wanted to. That's pretty amazing. Whereas if you want to do it on television, it costs a lot for the production. If you want to do it on radio, you would get the visual impact. But that's one of the things the internet did. Is it democratized, but also made it very dangerous. Because you can go to buildabomb.com. I don't know if they're up anymore. There are .coms on how to make guns out of paper. Matter of fact, we have a printer here where you can actually make a gun, a fully functional gun. You might only shoot one or two times, but it's enough to hurt somebody. The amount of information that's out there on the web now, the web is kind of like the Old West or the high seas in the 1500s. Piracy, plagiarism, theft of intellectual information are abound. And as a curator, I'm making sure that what you produce is credible, reliable, documentedly, and personally verifiable. It's actually a pretty important responsibility when, as a professional, you're putting something out there for people's education or entertainment. It's astounding how much people now have transferred, because before you heard it on the radio, people believed it. You know, in 1939, on Halloween, Orson Welles, who's known for his part in Citizen Kane, produced a show for Victory Radio Theater. It was called War of Worlds. And it was a dramatic reenactment of the science fiction novel that was written by H.G. Wells in the late 19th century. There was mass panic on the East Coast because people really thought Earth was being invaded by Martians. So if you tuned into that program and you didn't hear Orson Welles saying that we were doing a dramatic reenactment of the War of the Worlds, and you tuned in as they said that there were canisters landing outside of London, Paris, Washington, D.C., it was like watching, it's the equivalent of, you remember 9/11, the first time you saw that jet hit the World Trade Center. When you saw that, you believed it. So that credibility that is given to radio is then later on transferred to television. In such a way that many people actually hear what they see based on what they saw on television. I saw that accident, it's just like the one I saw on. So many gauge their relationships by what they see on television. Gauge their life. That's what made virtual shows so powerful. Is that people related to them and believed them. That as someone who is in a credible position now, deploying something through the web, who by virtue of that title of curator, people are confirming, the very fact that you work for a museum, people are confirming to you that you are presenting information that is accurate and true. Type is powerful. And we want to look at an agreement between what we see visually, graphic image, and what we see textually, as well as content. We want truth in content, but we also want truth in the relationship. And that includes things that fit together. Because when we have things that don't agree, all right, so a newscaster comes on TV and he says, there was a plane crash today in Libya, and there were 433 people killed. Isn't that kind of disturbing? What's disturbing?
Smile.
It creates a dissonance. Right? It makes it so easy. We are very visual. We are very visual beings. And so it's important that when we even type, they're designing for visual impact. Because in a very real way, it affects our credibility. And if you want to design, for example, there's going to be a political rally, there's some very important issues that are going to be addressed about the new Obamacare. You don't want to use one of those typefaces or fonts like comic. You don't want to use a Halloween typeface. You don't want to use the Old West typeface. Why? It's like talking about the plane crash with 493 people. It doesn't convey the visual message. So there is a lot of trust, even in the typefaces that we choose, that is being conferred on us. I bet you never thought of letters in that way before. Because it's not just letters, it's the words and then even the shape that's created in that space. So a letter form is that particular style and form of each individual letter of our alphabet. That they all have unique characteristics. So that even when they're transformed into different typefaces or fonts, they are still recognized as that formed letter. Did you ever hear that expression, mind your P's and Q's? Why? Because if I do the lowercase p, if I turn it around, it can look like a Q. And we have culturally decided how these actually sound. All right, so when you see this character based on its unique shape, its unique form, that there is actually now, we can make a transfer between this arbitrary symbol and the sound you will utter or think. So Shandi, what's this sound like? Okay? That's the letter, but what's it actually sound like? Because what you actually just said was this, which is a different thing in our association. Because what's this? It's a vowel, and it's what you do when you need to excrete liquid waste. Ha. Yeah. We've agreed that this sounds like because actually the letter sounds like this. And it's amazing because people will actually react, like I actually have the real thing up here. Like I just came up and took a leak on the board. So powerful is that association. We're very visual. Now I can't erase the EE on here. All right, so we've agreed that, that this sounds like, all right, we've also agreed that sounds like, When we really think about it, the only letter that even approximates the way our mouth forms, because all right, when Shandi said, all right, her lips didn't form the shape of a. The only letter that really corresponds to the actual shape our mouth creates is that one. O. O. It's the closest. O. O. But they have distinct characteristics because I take the O, it's like that. What do I need to do to take this very same shape and turn it into the Q on mine? Then it becomes a Q. How do I turn an I or an L into a different letter? This is when we're looking at the unique forms. So that is the letter form. Then, based on the form of letters that represent the sounds that we have in speech, we move to the typeface, which are still letter forms, numerals, and signs, but they are given distinct visual properties. And the typeface, I'm going to write, because that's what we're talking about when it's done in print, the old style, what we call typeface. And it was actually done in letters that were in metal. We use in computers now, we call it a font. So they are sets of these various letter forms that have consistent visual properties that are distinguishable from another typeface. And they create, in essence, the character or the recognizability of that particular letter form used in design.
This reminds me of my mother when she used to work, and she worked in a museum when I was a child, and she had to do her labels. She would have to bring out these plates that had a line and a groove. She had to use a pin that kind of made the same style of writing.
Yeah, she was using a template.
Yeah, and she had to do this with every label she made. And today, I don't do any of that because it's all on my computer.
You can all format it. Yeah.
Yeah,
You
it's
can format it all.
so convenient today. It's like a lost art form.
Today, though, if you've done any of the exhibits, the closest you'll come to having to do that, but it's already made for you. Has anyone done any of the labels on the walls with the letter set? All right, that you actually have to burnish the letters on. They're all set up for you. So you'll still actually have to work with letters in that way, but in an earlier time, those were letters you actually had to draw out with stencils. That's in earlier days, calligraphers charged a lot of money because they could consistently create almost mechanical looking type. So then you have the style, which is working on a typeface or font that alters the look of that typeface or font to give it its own characteristic. And when we look at its style, would be italic, bold, normal, shadow. You see all of those on your word processors, right? You've all seen those little icons. All right, that's the style given to a font or a typeface. And there are different ways that we interpret things now in print versus the web, too. So some examples of typefaces. Something that is a script that we see as being cursive, for example. Typo, all right, which is this one down here, the hamburgers. You got Bodoni as the typeface, future, so you got it in italics, which is a style. Typeface, and then the style. Futura, Helvetica, and then sans serif. Right? These are all examples of the typeface and style. And on the web, when something is in all caps, what's that mean? On the internet. Yeah, you're yelling something. All right, that's the equivalent now with the generation of cell phoners and web-savvy people. When something's in all caps, it's being yelled. So if you get a letter and it's all caps, what's pissed this person off? What's made them so excited? All right. Now the thing for me is that when I write, because my cursive writing is so bad, I'm still in the generation where the nuns hit you if you were left-handed. They'd actually grab your. I had to learn to write right-handed, and I'm left-handed. Sister Mary, she wanted everyone's lettering to go the same way. All right, the left hand's the devil's hand. I still break into a sweat when I see nuns. Remember that Blues Brothers movie? All right, where you wondered if she had feet or anything. I mean, I still have those kind of nightmares. Right? Sister Mary, it was actually Sister Mary Margaret. Yeah, that hand's the devil's hand. I mean, she whacked you. So I had to learn eventually because I couldn't write with either hand. It was really bad. So I write all caps. And people think I'm yelling at them when I write all caps. And it's actually something that came from an earlier time, which was a lot of yelling. So being aware of visual impact. And then when we're designing for print as compared to the web, being aware of the distinguishing between serif and sans serif. So, we have various fonts or typefaces. I mentioned before how serifs are the unique qualities on letters that give them that distinctive character that make them a typeface. Right? And I mentioned about what we have, remember that example, the Times New Roman, where you got the header, the footer. So, we look at Times New Roman in print is one of the common typefaces we see. And it's a serif. It has all of these headers, footers, and adornments on the letters. They give this cue a unique, and although it looks very similar to Georgia, there are qualities of Georgia that are different from Times New Roman. As compared to a sans serif, such as Comic Sans Serif or Arial. And when we're designing for print, we tend to expect visually something that is in a serif typeface. If we design for the web or for virtual catalog, we want to use sans serif. And for that matter, for readability on museum labels, you'll find out the best labels to read are actually sans serif. They allow you to recognize the letters very quickly with only a minimum amount of information. People aren't reading museum labels as paragraphs. Matter of fact, most people will walk by when you're doing an exhibition and you have your curator statement on the wall. Most people will walk by that if it's any longer than a paragraph. They're not there to read. They're there to look. That's why when I had you think about your curator statement, I said keep it within 300 words. It's going to be wasted on the web. And that's it. Beyond that. But if you're publishing a for-print catalog, then you think about something that's longer. So being aware of those qualities. And once again, we've been jumping back and forth between digital curation and the objects of curation, such as the various file formats. And digital curation is if you're actually designing a catalog or curating an exhibit. So we're using that word two different ways. One of the things, though, in digital curation is that during your lifetime, type will never be out of style. The written or printed word will not be out of style. It may change the format in which it is employed. Books may become extinct, but not in our lifetime. Elite usage?
Yeah, where there's only a select few people who have them, house them, use them.
I actually think it will become more eccentric. All right, the same way that people who collect vinyl albums. All right, you're a very, I don't know if you're elite, all right, and you have a very distinct way that you like to take in audio information. I don't know if we're becoming elite. Although there are science fiction novels that were written that were based on that, such as Fahrenheit 451. Or a movie. Actually, a couple of movies that were produced as mockumentaries or documentaries. If you remember Fahrenheit 451, the temperature at which it was a commentary on Bush. Remember, what's his name, Moore? Is it Michael Moore? He did it, in that essence of that, how information becomes disinformation and misinformation. And Ray Bradbury's assertion was that books would become contraband.
Yeah.
I don't think it will come to that, but I think they may become something where it becomes so like someone who collects LPs. Particularly now with the amount of information that's available in storage becoming a very real problem. More and more museums, if you were going to a library science, for example, a lot of the classes that people take as librarians, and curators and librarians, museum people end up taking, because museum holdings often contain books. And books are not infinite. It's more difficult to preserve a book beyond its lifespan than it is digital media. So people are learning about the techniques of scanning books, and then actually taking those scans of those books and putting them on there for people to be able to view or print if they want. But the original book then becomes sealed. An acid-free, oxygen-free container. There are repositories now that are in essence vacuums to prevent further deterioration of the material. Because in earlier time, and this is a challenge, for example, I used to collect comics. And my books are in acid-free Mylar bags with acid-free cardboard backing. And they'll last probably under 200 years in that, but they will decay because the paper upon which they were printed was not meant to be a precious thing. What made it precious was the story and the author and the artist. Even though something was mass-produced. Some of the popular sans serif fonts then. Because you are going to be designing your catalog for deployment on the web. Or a virtual catalog. It's not going to be intended to be printed out. So we were thinking about sans serif. There are times in the catalog you could think about using, for example, a serif typeface if it's going to be just a title. And that's it. What happens, I think I mentioned this earlier in the semester, is that when on a computer screen, when you have like a time to enrollment, all the letters start to blur together because of those adornments don't have enough pixels between them. And then the T will start to blend into the L, start to blend into the H, and makes it very difficult to read. So that's why it's important to use sans serif. So some of the more popular ones that you see. Now, back in the days of when I was talking about, we actually had your galleys and you had to cut your text up and then wax it down. What was one of the most popular sans serif formats was Helvetica. Helvetica is just disappearing in some office suites and the like, and was replaced by Arial regular. So it's very close to Helvetica, and a slightly, you might say, fancier or distinctive version was another, as was Trebuchet. It's a home. Became very popular replacements for Helvetica. So as you'll be getting the text for your labels, for the objects that you're using, you're going to be using sans serif formats because they read best on the web and read best on a computer screen. They are the cleanest. So the same types of principles of design when we were talking about design of a page. Some of these principles carry over to, you might say, it's kind of like what we do with images is the same type of thinking that we do with type. The same kind of thinking involved. Our composition as a painter, we think about composing with letters and typeface then. So when things are arranged according to emphasis, we think about a focal point. I'm taking, as an audit, I'm taking a digital dome class. And when you're looking at the digital dome, they have what they call, have you all seen something in the digital dome? Have you all seen a show in there? Right, it's a multimedia immersive experience. But they have what is called the sweet spot. In other words, if you're sitting in the dome, what is the place your eye is focusing on first? So when you're doing photography, you can't think about photography on that surface the same way you think about it as on here. Because when you're shooting photography in the dome, you're shooting with a fisheye lens, and what you would see as your horizon line with a regular lens on the dome is going to appear much higher. So you actually want to make sure that if you're leaning back a little bit when you're doing your photography, so the horizon line, or the point you want people to focus on, is actually underneath the second half of your lens. They call that the sweet spot. It's the same thing in layout, only you don't have to worry about the fisheye lens. What's the sweet spot? What is the first thing people are going to see? Not only visually as a graphic, but as text. Where are people going to focus on first? Designers think about this. That's why I said when you watch someone read a magazine, watch someone open a book, and watch what their eyes do. What is it they focus on first? You go to an exhibit. What stops people? And what is it about that painting or that sculpture that causes their eyes to dance? So we're looking at not only the position of type, and that's letters in relation to each other, but letters in relation to the blank, you might say the canvas of the page, and then the letters in relation to the graphics that we're using. A rhythm. And that rhythm being, or we could look at it in the same way as something is measurable and consistent. Something that interrupts rhythm in reading. You're reading a paragraph, and all of a sudden your eye hits something. You've got like a 4-line paragraph, and you've got 1 line, and then another 4-line paragraph, half a line, and then a 3-line paragraph. That's out of rhythm. It makes us, whenever we see just that single line, we might think that it's a title. Or it's just hanging out there. It interrupts the flow. Typographically and in layout, we want to make sure that things allow a person's eye to move easily. Color and contrast. I talked about that a little bit when I was talking about don't use, when you're designing posters and the like, don't use yellow letters on a white background. Color choice. Color is very, very culture bound. In such a way that, and experience bound. When I first went into college and I started teaching, when I graded papers, I always graded in green. Rather than what other color? Red. Doesn't red create alarm? I mean, you can get 100 and it's written in red and it still looks scary. Because you see the red and sometimes when I got the paper back it looks like your teacher cut a vein and there's blood all over it. Right? There's so much. So when editing, critique on it. And it could be great comments when it's written in red. So I always grade it in green, which is a complementary color. But it somehow made it more green. Now be aware, color is culture and experience bound. In this country, what's the color of mourning? I mean, you're feeling sad. Black. What's the color of purity? In Japan, what's the color of mourning? White. It's very culture bound. So we're also aware that our audience is actually going to respond to color based on their own cultural background. In Northern Plains, what's the color of victory? What color would you paint your face when you're victorious? Black. So with this awareness, the color is very culture bound, and it does have to some degree a psychological impact on us. Contrast in size. One of the things you might even have seen, have you ever heard of a drop cap? What's a drop cap?
The larger first letter.
A larger first letter. And we become conditioned. So if you see this large, we see it as a capital P. We are culturally conditioned to read this P only connected to the RIN key, as to page, line, because we'll use a typeface that will accent as a drop cap. That's size, but it's also contrast, as well as weight. Something being bold, something looking very heavy, as to looking very light.
I notice when I see bold print, like the line bold print, I'll read that first before I read anything else.
Yes.
Because it gives me a clue as to what I'm going to be reading about.
Yeah. And usually with something in bold print, it will be just its own single line. That's why if you read a paragraph and you see just one line, and it's not bold-faced, it's kind of startling. Because even the various styles give us cues about the type we're about to read. They're almost like the styles, we could say, are punctuation on letters, in the same way that punctuation marks are for sentences and paragraphs. One of the things I used to do on the very first day of class, this is when I taught writing, I would give students a paper to read, and the paragraphs would have no punctuation. So you could not tell when one sentence ended and the next one began, because I would also remove all the capital letters. It's amazing how much we rely on punctuation and capitalization in visual media. I mentioned alignment earlier in the semester. And once again, when we look at something being flush left or ragged right, the text is aligned along the left side. I mentioned how this is aligned, all the first characters align with each other. There's like so much more rag on the right side. Justified means that it's completely aligned on the right, the left and the right side, so it looks like a square or a block of text. If it's centered, there is this imaginary central vertical axis that the text aligns itself with, or asymmetric, where there is no balance at all. It's not conforming to a set and repetitive arrangement. Asymmetric text is difficult to read. So generally, it's used in posters, announcements, and things like that, more so than things that people are going to read for any extended period of time. And because we are conditioned to read right to left, top to bottom, that most often you will see paragraphs, labels that are going to be flush left and ragged right, or fully justified. In our culture, seeing something that is flush right, ragged left, looks really strange. Matter of fact, if you opened a book and you saw it flush right, or ragged left, you'd think that you were in the wrong page, or maybe at the end of the book, you'd be very disoriented. Because, or poetry. Yeah, it might be a book of poetry. Yeah, avant-garde, strange stuff that artists do. Artists do, whacked out poets on LSD. We are culturally conditioned to view type in certain ways. So we need to be aware, once again, not only conditioned to color, or we're conditioned to alignment. We also want to think about unity. We want typefaces that are actually going to complement each other and work in such a way that we can determine something being ordinate or most important or subordinate to another. Like Pat had mentioned, you see something in boldface. All right, that's an important statement. The text under it is going to support that statement or be related to that statement. So when we're using contrasting styles, faces, and weights rather than using similar faces. For example, don't use Ariel right next to home. It's going to look weird. Don't use a capitalized boldface title in Ariel and then have the text underneath it to home. It looks disjointed, believe it or not, even though they're both sans serif. So there are times to think about when you're going to use complementary and dissimilar at the same time typefaces. At the same time, typefaces that have pronounced or exaggerated characteristics don't mix well either. So all those goofy poster typefaces. Often can confuse a viewer. They might work well for an accent, one time for a title. Don't mix them with each other. And you really want to think about it as, as someone who's designing a catalog, then, believe it or not, you want to be bland and yet interesting at the same time. You want to be redundant and creative at the same time. Creative redundancy and excitingly bland. So avoid mixing two or more sans serif typefaces in a design, and you really want to look at how do things harmonize with each other related to size. How does the size and choice of the typeface work with the visuals you have? And do you have this correspondence and alignment between the typefaces with each other and the typefaces with the visuals? Putting something in boldface and a large type size next to an image detracts from the image because you're telling the person you have competing sources of important information. It makes it more difficult to perceive. It's amazing how much badly designed stuff is out there, especially with the democratization of the web. There are many more badly designed web pages and web catalogs than there are good ones. And we won't go into the technical aspects of writing, for example, kerning and the like. We'll instead use letter spacing, which is the space between letters, word spacing, the space between word and line spacing. They all have a visual impact. And you have a lot of control over that in the various word processors as well as design tools now. And something about deployment on the web that was a different consideration when doing print. Because you had to be aware of line, letter, and word spacing in print because you could have a book that's 600 pages long, which with a little bit of adjustment difference in printing a book cost-wise for 400 pages as compared to 600. On the web, you're not burning electrons. You're not paying for the electrons. You're not paying for the pixel, technically. You do have bandwidth that you have to consider. And larger documents are larger file sizes that you are hosted by a server or a company that charges you for the amount that people download. And you've got a document that's 4 gigabytes large, and you have a 100 gigabyte limit. Only 25 people can download that document, and then you start to get charged beyond your usage. But in general, on the web, white space isn't necessarily a bad thing. Now, many artists and many cultures have what was broken down when they looked at a lot of the Celtic as well as Norse or Scandinavian art, they call it horror vacui, fear of empty space. Empty space is important, and that includes in the design of the page. Empty space is important in a paragraph. It's the space in between letters, and the space between sentences. Empty space is important in music. And music is called the rest. Empty space is important in speaking. It's called the pause. And think of that visually in design. Empty space. So the same way an artist has to handle empty space on a canvas. Think about how you handle empty space on a web page or a catalog page later. Empty space is all right. I mentioned how the white box is part of the Museum of Modern Art, the white cube, where you create a lot of empty space around the object. So people were as if they were in this white cube where there was only that one object. Everything else would be tuned out. Think of that in the same way when you're designing a catalog. Replicating that same notion that people focus on that object and you've given them enough space around it, and that includes with the type as well as the empty space for them to perceive it in the best possible manner. So when you're designing with type, think about the form, the direct and secondary meanings that people have, which includes something being boldface, all caps, and that graphical impact. Look at the relationship of the type and the visuals as you are creating design solutions. Understand how you can use type creatively and expressively. Do you remember that one page I showed you where the person's name actually was wrapped around a cube? In one instance it worked because it looked like it was just kind of falling down the stair like a slinky. But on the other one, you couldn't read the guy's name as being Fritz. It looked like Fritten or Frightened. So to summarize, typography is the design of letter forms and how we arrange them in two-dimensional space for print or space and time for digital media. In either case, you want to think about the issues of form, structure, design, message content, and expression. We want to be able to differentiate effectively among the various letter forms, that we can use type most effectively. That you are creating an illusion as you do this. On the web, that illusion, that object is right in front of them. That's one of the wonderful things now with this scanner that we have here. And how we're looking at how do you take the objects that we're scanning in 3D and allow people to rotate them on the screen to get that illusion of being 3D and actually being tactile. Although the only thing you're touching is the mouse. But you're actually able to take that pot and turn it upside down, look inside, and even zoom into it to look at a little crack inside of the vessel. That's that illusion that we create. Because as soon as this thing turns off, it's gone. It doesn't exist. That's that notion of space and time. We look at weight, position, and arrangement. Right now, the exercises you're doing, after this week, most of what you need to be able to do, you've been working on in the various exercises. The various tools that you learned in the exercises on in design, most of it you'll be able to activate as you design your own now. This is your training wheels. Now you're going to get a chance to go on a two-wheeler instead of 4 or 3. We want to look at these relationships then between the visuals and the type so that we maximize the impact. And ultimately, as someone who is viewed as a credible personality, as a credible curator, it's not only credible in the quality and amount of information you provide, but also how you provide and present it. What I need you to do is to go to